Masechet Avoda Zara, Daf Yod Dalid, Elu Devarim Asurim Limkor Legoy. Itzteru Balin, Ubenot Shuach, Uftot Tarot, Ulbona, Vetarnegol Halaban. The following things one may not sell to a non-Jew because these are things that are typically used in idolatrous service. The first one, isteru balin, comes from a Greek word that's related to strobe, meaning round, like a strobe light is round. So it's a circular item and seems to be referring to an acorn or a pine cone, as the Gemara will further explain. And in fact, we know that this was used in idolatrous service. Here is a Roman statue of a god with a pine cone up on top of its staff. You could see it right there. And this was associated with medicine. So that's one item. And benot shuach, we will explain, is talking about white figs, and the Gemara will talk about what petot tarot are. And lebona, frankincense, the name right there means white, and a white rooster. So these are various things that are white, and white was also something that was considered good luck and a sign of purity or health, free from disease, and these things were sacrificed to deities, especially for the sake of medicine. Therefore, if the non-Jew is coming and buying these things, it is likely that he wants them specifically to use for idolatry, and therefore the Jew cannot participate and sell it to them. Rabbi Yehuda Omer mutadim kolo tanegol lavan ben tanegolin. Rabbi Yehuda is more lenient than Tanakama and says one may sell to a non-Jew a white rooster as long as it's together with other roosters. You'll sell them a whole bunch of roosters, 10 roosters, and then some of them are white and some of them are black. So then, therefore, it's not particular. It just happens to be some of them are white. And then if he uses it for whatever he uses it for, it's not our business. But the point is, you're not selling him specifically a white rooster because there's white ones, but they're mixed up with other ones too, so that's okay. But if it's a white rooster alone, then here is a way that you may sell it. You cut off one of its toes, and thereby the idol worshiper will not sacrifice it because they have laws of blemishes also. They're not as strict as Jewish laws, but they would not sacrifice a defective animal, one that's missing a toe, to its idol, but they may eat it or whatever they want to do with it, so you can sell it to them in a defective, and then they can't use it for idolatry. Regarding all other items, if it's not one of these things that are white, that are specifically generally used for idolatry, other things, if you just sell it to them stam and he doesn't say anything, I just want to buy this, whatever it is, then it's permitted. But if he specifies, I want to use this for Avoda Zara, then you cannot sell it to them. Rabbi Meir says also a good palm tree, this chatzav and naklav items, probably date trees, is prohibited to sell to goyim because they use these items also for idolatry, according to Rabbi Meir. Mai itzteru balin. Gemara asks, what is this item, itzteru balin? Tornita, it's tornita. Not clear what tornita is exactly. Maybe something to do with the cedar tree, some part of it. In any case, the Gemara doesn't like that definition because urminu osifu alehen alekesin v'isteru balin muchsasin ubenot shuach. Regarding the laws of Shivi'it, there's a list of all plants that one is prohibited from using and harvesting during Shivi'it, and then there is a baraita in which they add to that list, and part of the addition of the list is this alexin, which is over here some kind of acorns. And then isturubalin, that's our item, so this is gonna be useful for helping us define it. And then these other items, muhsin is an edible cherry-like berry, and these white figs. All these items are prohibited on Shivi'it. And if you think that Istur means Tornita, as we first said, well, Tornita, is there a prohibition against Tornita on Shevi'it? Ve'hatenan. It says Hatenan, but it's actually a Braita. Ze kelal, kol sheyesh lo ikar, yesh lo Shevi'it. V'chol she'en lo ikar, en lo Shevi'it. Something that has a root, or a root that remains, or a trunk, something that has that, a plant that has that, is prohibited on Shevi'it. But if it does not have a root that stays, then it's not prohibited on Shevi'it. And this Tornita, whatever it is included in the second category, does not have this type of root, and therefore is not prohibited on Shevi'it. So, if Isturbalin is Tornita, then it should not be included in the list over here of Hosifu Alehen, of added things, that plants that are prohibited in Shevi'it. If Isturbalin, which is listed here, is Tornita, but Tornita doesn't have this Ikar, and therefore it should be permitted during Shevi'it. So, this identification does not work with this other Baraita that has to do with Shevi'it. Elam Rav Safra. Pere de arza, v'chen ki ata Rabin amar Rabbi Elazar, pere de arza. Rather, Rav Safra explains that it's the fruit of a cedar tree, meaning pine cones. And so too, when Ravin came from Eretz Israel, he said, name of Rabbi Elazar, that's referring to fruit of a cedar tree. Pine cones, as we explained earlier when we read the Mishnah, these were known to be commonly used in idolatrous service. Benot Shuach, Amar Rabba Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Te'ene Chivarata. Benot Shuach, where Rabbi Yochanan says, is referring to white figs. Again, they like white things in these idolatrous services. Ufto Tarot, Amar Rabba Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Pif Totarot Tehen Shanu. What is Totarot? Rabbi Yochanan explains it's not a different plant, but rather it means the stems. That when these things are prohibited to sell, it's only prohibited to sell with their stems attached, because they would tend to hang them as decorations, and they need their stems attached in order to do that. But if they're pruned, don't have the stems anymore, then they won't be useful for idolatry anymore. Levona Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Lebona Zakah. When it says Lebona frankincense, it's talking about pure frankincense. That's the type that's used for idolatry. Tana Mikolan Mochlin Lahen Chabila. There's a Baraita that says regarding all these things, one is prohibited only from selling them in a small quantity, which will be used by the buyer for idolatry. But if you sell a large quantity, a whole bundle, then it's okay, because no one's going to use that much. That means you're just a merchant, just a middleman who's going to sell to others, but the merchant himself is not going to use it for idolatry. V'chama chavila, how much is called a bundle? Peresh Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera and chavila pechuta mishelosha minin. A bundle means something that is at least the weight of 300 dinar. Hold on. Why aren't we worried that, I might sell some frankincense or white figs, a big bundle of them, to a merchant, but the merchant will sell them to others who are going to offer them for idolatry. So I'm still being involved in idolatry. How come it should be prohibited? Amar Abaye, lifne mepakedinan, lifne de lifne la mepakedinan. Abaye explains that we are commanded regarding lifne iver lo titen michshol. Don't put a stumbling block before a blind person. Even though I'm not the one that's worshiping idolatry, I'm not allowed to sell someone an item and enable them to do idolatry, because that's putting a stumbling block before them. That is the commandment in one step. But we are not commanded to not put a stumbling block in front of someone else who should not put a stumbling block in front of someone else. So that's already 2 steps removed, and there's no commandment regarding that. I am allowed to sell something to someone else who themselves will, as long as they themselves will not worship idols, even though that person, the merchant, may be enabling other people to do it. Okay, that's already 2 steps removed out of my hands, and so there's no prohibition there. V'tarnegol lavan, one may not sell a white rooster to a non-Jew. Amar Rabbi Yonah, Amar Rabbi Zara, Amar Rab Zebid. V'kadematne Amar Rabbi Yonah, Amar Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Yonah, whose name means Rabbi Dove, interestingly, tells us a halacha about a bird. Anyway, there's two versions. One has Rabbi Yonah saying in the name of Rabbi Zera, in the name of Rab Zebid, and the second version leaves out the last rabbi, just Rabbi Yonah in the name of Rabbi Zera. What you see here is that sometimes when we have named traditions, sometimes it goes back to teachers and sometimes three teachers. Anyway, Tanegol lemi, mutar limkor lo Tanegol lavan. Tanegol lavan lemi, asur limkor lo Tanegol lavan. Rabbi Yonah teaches that if the non-Jewish customer goes around saying, who has a rooster? I want to buy a rooster. He's in the marketplace. Who has a rooster? Then one is permitted to sell him a white rooster because he just asked for a rooster, any rooster. He would have taken any kind. But if he goes around saying, who has a white rooster to sell? Then you see he specifically wants a white rooster. If it's just to eat it for dinner, then what does it matter what color it is? Rather, it must mean that he wants it for Avoda Zara. In that case, it's prohibited. So you see Rabbi Yonah is giving a leniency in limiting the prohibition in the Mishnah only to someone who says, I want a white rooster. But if he says, I just want to buy a rooster, then it's permitted. Now we're going to have a challenge against Rabbi Yonah from the second part of the Mishnah, Tenan. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Mocheru lo tarnegol lavan ben tarnegolin. Rabbi Yehuda disagreed with Tanakama, and he apparently was more lenient and said one is permitted to sell to a non-Jew a white rooster as long as it's together with other roosters of various colors. Now, what case is Rabbi Yehuda assuming, and the whole Mishnah assuming? If it's a case where the non-Jewish customer is saying who can sell a white rooster, who can sell a white rooster, then it would be prohibited for sure, because you know that he's looking for a white rooster, he's going to use it for idolatry. In that case, there's no way that Rabbi Yehuda would permit, even if it was together with other roosters. The ones that are white, he's going to use for idolatry. You know he wants white ones. Rather, it must be that the Mishnah is a case where the customer just says, I want to buy a rooster. And so even though he's saying, I just want a rooster, and nevertheless, Rabbi Yehuda only permits if you sell it together, a mixture of white roosters among other roosters. But by itself, it would not be permitted, not even according to Rabbi Yehuda, who is lenient. So according to Tanakama, that would mean, since he's more stringent, Tanakama would say, not only can you not sell a white rooster by itself, even a white rooster among other roosters also would not be permitted. And you see that both according to Tanakama and according to the Yehuda, according to this deduction, because we went through the different possibilities, they would both agree that one may not sell a white rooster to a non-Jew, even though he's only saying Tanegol lemi. He didn't say who has a white rooster, he's only saying who has a rooster. And this is a challenge to the Rabbi Yonah, because Rabbi Yonah says as long as you're not asking for a white rooster, you're just asking for a rooster, then it's permitted. So how can we reconcile the Rabbi Yonah with the Mishnah? Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak hacha b'maiskinan kegon damar ze vazeh. Nachman bar Yitzchak says no, this Mishnah is not. You're right. It's not talking about a case where he's specifically asking for a white one. It's also not talking about a case where he says I just want a rooster, but rather it's when he says both. He points to the roosters and says I want this one and that one, and he points to a white one and he points to a non-white one. And so since he's pointing to different ones, that's where the machloket is. And Tanakama says, no, he's pointing to a white one, even though he's also pointing to another one. Yeah, but he is, one of them he's pointing to is a white one. And so therefore you have to assume he's going to use the white one for idolatry. It's prohibited. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says, no, since he's pointing to different kinds, so you can sell them, all of them, together, and we just wants different kinds. So since it's a mixture, then you can assume that he's just using them and he wants different kinds, and it's permitted. Tanya namehachi, and we have a braita to back this up. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, ematai bizman shamar tanegol תרנגול זה לבן. אבל אם אמר זה וזה מותר. Braita says, quoting Rabbi Yehuda, says, when is there a prohibition of selling a white rooster? Only if the customer says, I want this one that is white. He picks only one of them. Then for sure it's prohibited. And everybody would agree with that. But if he says, I want this white one and also this black one, then it's permitted. So Tanakama would say no, because he said a white one and a black one, but he specified a white one. So as long as any of them that he specifies has to be white, so it's prohibited. But according to Yehuda, he's just pointing them out. Maybe he just thinks they look nice and fat. And so that's why he's pointing them out. He's not pointing only white ones, and so therefore it's permitted. And now the Braita continues with another leniency. Even if he says this one, and he's only buying one, and he points to a white one, but if you know that he's making a wedding feast for his son, or he has a son who's sick at home, a family member who's sick at home, then it's permitted, because then you can assume that he's using the rooster to eat at the wedding feast, or to make chicken soup for the sick person who is in his house. So then he's not going to sacrifice it to an idol. He's actually going to use it. He has a practical use for it. V'atanya, now challenge to this last halacha from another Braita. Goy she'asa mishte libno, eno asur, ela oto hayom ve'oto ha'ish bilbad. We learned this Braita up above. In the Mishnah, actually, and back on Daf Chet, where it says that a non-Jew who makes a wedding feast for his son, then it's prohibited to sell him an animal, because at wedding feasts, that was considered a holy event, and they would make sacrifices to idols at wedding feasts. Although that prohibition is only for that day of the wedding, and only that person who's making the wedding. It doesn't apply to anybody else, nor to even him on other days. But that person is prohibited. You just said that if you know he has a wedding, then you can sell him this white rooster. But that doesn't make sense. If he has a wedding, you can't sell him any animal. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Rabbi Shashia betavuzig. And so Rabbi Yitzchak bar Rabbi Shashia says, no, we're not talking about a wedding festival. When it says mishteh, we're talking about rather a social gathering. He has a picnic, so a dinner, not specifically a wedding. A wedding is a big thing where they would make, was considered holy, and they made sacrifices to idols. But other social gatherings, they did not do idolatrous sacrifices. So if you know, oh, he's just having a big dinner party, so he's certainly going to use this to eat and not to worship, then it is permitted. Tenan, ushar kol hadevarim setaman mutar uperushan asur. The Mishnah continued and taught that regarding all other items, besides the items that are in the beginning of the list in the Mishnah, those are prohibited. They're white things and typically used for idolatry. But regarding all other things, if there's no specification, then it's permitted to sell them to non-Jews. But if something is specified, then it's prohibited. My setaman, my perushan. What does it mean? What are you not specifying, and what are you specifying? Perhaps when you say without specification, that means white wheat, and with specification is when the non-Jew says, I want to buy this to use for idolatry. Is that what it means? La setaman sericha lememar de mezabeninan, vela perushan sericha lememar de la mezabeninan. No, that can't be, because you wouldn't have to teach anything, not in either case. Regarding the case of not specified, if you just say, I want to buy white wheat, you don't have to tell me that that's permitted. You're allowed to sell wheat to people, and they want white wheat because that's what they want to use. This is not something that's typically used for idolatry, so he wants white wheat for his recipe to make something. And if he says specifically, I want to buy this to use for Avoda Zara, then obviously you're not allowed to sell it to him, and the Mishnah would not have to teach us this at all. Ela setaman de kamar chite, perushan de kamar chivarata. Rather, perhaps when it says setam, it means regarding wheat. It says, I want to buy wheat. Then it's permitted. And specified means I want to buy white wheat. If he says specifically, I want to buy wheat that is white, oh, why does he want white wheat? Now, it could be that he wants to use it for Avodah Zarah, is prohibited. Is that the reading of the Mishnah? That also doesn't make sense, because Mikela de Tarnegola Fidusetaman Namila. If it has to be a difference between wheat, meaning all other things, and the things that are listed in the beginning, like roosters. So if you say that wheat that is specified is prohibited, then that would mean that a rooster, even if it's not specified, it is not prohibited. But that is not true. In other words, if you say that wheat is different from roosters, how is it different? Wheat, if you don't specify, then it's permitted, and if you do specify white, then it's prohibited. But then roosters have to be somehow more stringent than wheat. So that means for roosters, even if you don't specify, it's still if you don't specify what kind, it's prohibited. But we learned above that regarding roosters, if you just say, someone says, I want to buy a rooster, it's permitted. That was the Bionaz law. And so this understanding doesn't make sense either. So instead we're going to go back to our original answer, that setam means if the customer says, I want to buy white wheat, that's okay, you could sell it to them. It's not typically used for idolatry. But if he says specifically, I want to use it for idolatry, it's prohibited. Now, we asked about that. Isn't that obvious? If he wants to use it for idolatry, isn't that obvious that that's prohibited? And we're going to answer. No, we need this halacha. Maybe with this guy who's buying it, he really is not going to use it for idolatry. Rather, why is he saying he wants to use it for idolatry? It's because he is so attached to idolatry. He loves idolatry. And he figures, just like I love idolatry, he says that person, he means himself, so too everybody loves this idolatry. He doesn't realize that he's buying from a Jew who doesn't believe in this idolatry, but he thinks that everybody does. And he says, can I buy this? I'm going to use it for idolatry. He thinks that by saying that, he will get it for free, or at least get a good price. But he's actually not going to use it for idolatry, so I might have thought that's permitted, even though he says, come on, give me this wheat, I'm going to use it for idolatry, I'm not even eating it, I'm making it a sacrifice. So he's only saying that to get a good price, or to get it for free, but he doesn't mean it. So I might have thought that is permitted. That's why the Mishnah has to come say, no, not so. If he says I'm using it for idolatry, then sorry. Even these other items, you cannot sell it to him. But Rav Ashi has a question. If a non-Jewish customer is going around saying, who can sell to me a white rooster that is damaged, that it has a limb cut off? Can you sell them a white rooster that is whole, that is not damaged? Do we say on the one hand that since he said I want it to be something that's damaged, so he's not going to use it for idolatry because he says I want a damaged one. He's okay with paying less for a damaged one, so he's not going to use it for avodah that's permitted. Or maybe not. Maybe he is using a trick. He knows that the Jewish sellers are not going to sell a white rooster that's whole. So he's saying, listen, I want a white rooster. Give me a damaged one. Now, there's not so many damaged ones on the market. People aren't usually buying them, so people aren't usually selling them. So it's just a way of saying, of koshering it, so that then the Jew would be able to sell it to him. But really, he means that he's going to use it for avodah zarah, and therefore, even though he said katua, you can always sell him a damaged one, but you cannot sell him a whole one. That's question number one. And if you answer that question and say no, you're not allowed, because we assume he's using this trick, this artifice. Tanagol lavan lami, vihabule shachor ushkal, vihabule adom ushkal, mahu limkor lo lavan. If he comes around and saying, who can sell me a white rooster? Who could sell me a white rooster? Now that already is not allowed. But here's the thing. So you sold him, if you offered him a black one and he bought it, and you offered him a red one and he bought it, then can you sell him a white one? Mi amrinan kevan vihabu shachor ushkal, adom ushkal, lav avodah zarah kaba'eh. Do we say on the one hand, look, he bought a black one, he bought a white one, and so then you can sell him a white, he bought a black one, he bought a red one, then you can sell him a white one also, because look, he's buying lots of them, and he's not going to use it for avodah zarah, because otherwise he wouldn't have bought the black and the red one. Or maybe this also is a trick. You see, at first he asked for a white one, so he knows, listen, they're not going to sell me a white one, but if he uses a trick as follows, if I buy a black one and buy a red one, I'll do that just to show, as if, make believe, wink, wink, that he's not going to use them for idolatry. But really, he's willing to spend extra money to buy the black and the red one just so that he can get the white one, and he thinks that that's a loophole that the Jews will accept. But really, he has intention all along is only to get the white one to use for idolatry. So both this question is left open. Teko. Rabbi Meir Omer, af dekel. Rabbi Meir says also one cannot sell a palm tree and also chatzav. אמר לרב יחסד לבימי, גמירת עבודה זרה באברהם אבינו 400 פרקי הוויין, וענן 5 תנן, ולא ידעינן מאי כאמרינן. So Rav Chisda told Abimi, we have a tradition that Abraham Abinu had 400 chapters regarding Avoda Zara. He learned, he knew all the details of the laws of Avoda Zara and learned he had 400 chapters of laws, and we have only 5. So we're missing, we lost a lot of these halachot. And even these 5 that we have, I don't know what they mean. Well, my kashya. So Avimi says, well, what question do you have about these 5 chapters? We're talking about the Mishnayot of this Masechet. Tekatane Rabbi Meir Omer, af tekel tab, chatzab venaklas asur limkol legoyim. It's this Mishnah here that says, according to Rabbi Meir, he adds to the list of prohibited items and says a good palm tree and chatzab and naklas, some kind of dates, one is prohibited from selling to non-Jews. Dekel tab hu de la mezabeninan, ha dekel bish mezabeninan. Since he says you can't sell a good cedar tree, a good palm tree rather, that's what you can't sell, but that would mean that a bad palm tree one can sell. Right? That's what it seems from this Mishnah. But there's a problem because that contradicts another Mishnah later on. You cannot sell them anything that is attached to the ground because then they're going to worship it like an Asherah tree. So that would mean that doesn't matter if it's a good palm tree or a bad palm tree, it's prohibited. So I have a contradiction. I don't understand this. Amar le, my dekel tab, perot dekel tab, v'chen amar Ravuna, perot dekel tab. And so Abimi explained, no, when it says a good palm tree, it doesn't mean that the tree itself is good, but rather it's talking about the fruit. It's the fruit of a good palm tree is prohibited, and as Ravuna also said, the fruit of a good palm tree is prohibited. But the fruit of a bad palm tree, that's what's permitted. But you're right, according to the other Mishnah, anything that is attached to the ground, that would be prohibited. Chasav kashba. Naklas ki ata Rav Dimi amar bichama bar Yosef koryate. What is chasav? Chasav is kashba. Type of date, tree. And naklas, when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael, he said, name it to be Chama bar Yosef, that it is a koraita, also another type of date tree. Amar le Abayel Rav Dimi, tena naklas v'layadinan ma huvat amat kor yate v'layadinan ma ahanit li. So Abayel told Rav Dimi, we have naklas in the Mishnah, and we don't know what it is. And you came and you taught us, Rav Dimi, you came from Eretz Yisrael, and you taught us that, it means kor yate. But we don't know what that is either. So you gave, there's one word we didn't know. You replaced it with another word, but we don't know what that is either. So what have you benefited us? Amar le ahanai lechu dechi az lat lehatam amart lehu naklas velayadai amart lehu kor yate veyadeh vekama chavulach. And Rav Dimi says, I did help you, even though right now you don't know what this word means. It's very simple. If you go to Eretz Yisrael, then if you ask for naklas, they're not going to know what it is. It's not a popular term. But if you ask for kor yate, the term that I told you, people will know what it is, and they'll bring it to you, and they'll show it to you. So I'm giving you a way of finding out what it means. Okay, you don't know right now what the word means, but I'm telling you how people generally refer to it now in Eretz Yisrael. And here it is, koryata. It's a fruit of a fishtail palm. It is a type of date that looks similar to a nut. And if you go to Eretz Yisrael, now you know the right term, and you'll be able to see exactly what it is. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.